perfectly with the Industrial Revolution, countries in World War I could produce even more terrifying weaponry like better artillery, massive tanks, destructive machine guns, and poison gas. Artillery was a huge threat on the battlefield. In its simplest form, an artillery piece is a cannon, but in World War I, these cannons had some major upgrades. Looking almost nothing like they did in the American Revolutionary War, most artillery guns had long, hydraulic barrels, cushioning the kickback so they could be reloaded even faster. Because beasts like these could be extremely hard to transport along the front lines, they had to be loaded into a mini railroad track that went through the trenches. Another type of bomb-launching device is a mortar. Interestingly, these fall into the artillery category but are very different from the long-barreled guns. Mortars have short barrels that rest on the ground pointed up. When a shell was dropped into the top, it would fall down the barrel and hit the spike at the bottom. As the shell hit the bottom, it would detonate the gunpowder and push the shell forward exactly like a gun. Mortars were incredibly useful in the field because of their ability to launch at such a high angle so they could be placed in the trenches. Machine guns, which were also part of what made World War I the first modern war, were an extremely effective defense mechanism. The first machine gun was a Gatling gun. Because the Gatling gun was horribly inaccurate, liable to break, and only shot 200 rounds per minute, game-changing machine guns like the British Vickers were invented. Keeping up a constant rate of fire of 450 to 500 rounds per minute, it could shoot over 4,000 yards. Surprisingly, the Germans quickly prioritized this newfound technology and mass-produced, captured, and bought over 12,000 machine guns, a massive number considering the British and French only had hundreds. Of the German machine guns, some were the Maxim machine gun, the Madison machine gun, and the gassed M1917. There were also some anti-tank guns such as the Mauser T-Gore, which were not automatic. The recoil could break the collarbone of the soldier firing it because of the absolutely massive rounds it shot. Machine guns were crucial in World War I. Cavalry warfare came to an abrupt end in World War I. With muddy trenches that spanned miles and more accurate guns, a horse's only use was to pull artillery from place to place. Tanks started out originally as armored tractors with cat tracks. Cat tracks were useful because they would not become stuck in the mud nearly as easily. Tanks developed from tractors when the top was covered and small artillery pieces and/or machine guns were added. In Britain, where the first tanks were developed, they were given the code name Water Tank to throw off any suspicions. Although the first tank against Germany was a mechanical failure, the British and French mass-produced 5,500 tanks, while Germany made a pitiful 20. Probably the best tank in World War I is the French Renault FT light tank, because it was equipped with a rotating turret. Another tank was the British Whippet. Though it only had 4 machine guns, which provided all-around shooting, the Whippet had 2 motors originally meant for buses, so it could really move, maxing out at 8 miles per hour. Being in a tank was not pleasant, along with the engine noise being extremely deafening. If a bullet collided with a tank, shrapnel could fly everywhere and cause serious injury. The tank was a more deadly replacement for cavalry and was very important to the Allies. In the trenches, poison gas was another huge threat. Because of the massive artillery shell shortage in World War I, Germany had to improvise on other methods of attack. To the world's dismay, gas is what they came up with. At first, gas was deployed in massive cylinders that, when lighted, billowed the deadly smoke. The Germans' first gas attack was a huge success, killing or paralyzing most of the Allied troops in the trench. There were 2 big problems with these cylinders, though. One of them being that the wind could only be blowing away from the Germans if they wanted to light the cylinders. To solve this, they needed to find a way to launch the gas cylinders into enemy lines. so naturally they shot them out of artillery. When a gas bomb landed, it can contain one of three gases: mustard, chlorine, or phosgene gas. Chlorine was not very lethal and could be treated by a urine-soaked cloth placed around the mouth. Phosgene gas was incredibly deadly, responsible for 80% of the gas-related deaths in World War I, causing severe lung burning and vomiting. Phosgene gas made for a slow, agonizing death. In the words of Second Lieutenant Ernest Shepard, men were caught by fumes in dreadful agony, coughing and vomiting, rolling on the ground. Since mustard gas was odorless and colorless, it could be very tricky to protect against, especially because it could penetrate the skin, causing blisters. But if a soldier was caught without a gas mask, things could get gnarly. After only a little exposure to mustard gas, a soldier's eyes would start to burn and go blind. His skin would blister, and eventually, after much pain, he would die. Mustard gas could stay on the battlefield for days after it was deployed. The mental strain on soldiers was almost too much, having to always have a gas mask close and knowing that he might wake up in agony. Normally, when an alarm bell sounded to signal a gas attack in the trenches, soldiers would rush to put on their masks, but since mustard gas was odorless and colorless, the soldiers thought it was a false alarm and took off their masks. Creeping along a battlefield, the mustard gas wreaked havoc, causing all soldiers to die or be hospitalized. Most commanders agree that gas made life worse in the trenches and not much else. From tanks to poison gas, machine guns, and even artillery, war drastically changed forever. Newer machines were created that made mass killing even easier, which is probably why there are 33.4 million casualties in World War I. World War I was horrific.